Rabbi Herzl, would you like me to share my screen?
Yeah, I'm going to make you a co-host so you could share. Okay, good. Okay, so Tzvika's sharing. So those who are here, you can go on the Zoom and see his screen. It's your Zoom. Yeah, it's the same Zoom as we normally do for Rashi and all that.
Tell me if this works.
Yeah, it works.
No?
It worked, but then you took it away.
Okay, let's go back. No, that's not it.
Do you know you need help with the Wi-Fi?
Recording in progress.
All right, did that work?
Wait, one of you guys have to mute. Yeah, it works. Okay.
All right.
I'm getting the echo.
Okay, so my topic is the topic of reprisals in the Bible, and the idea is that today we're seeing what's going on with our brothers and sisters in Israel, and we're trying to understand how could it be that so many people in the world are against us, and they're using international law to say that a lot of these civilian deaths are not legitimate, and we're trying to scream back and say how. And I would like to present to you today one way of understanding the legal framework for understanding how the laws of war work, and why it is that there's this controversy about the killing of innocents, which is obviously a fundamentally and inherently tragic event. And to me, the first place I'd like to start is in the Torah, and just understanding why it is that the Torah is so quiet or silent, I don't know what the right word is, about reprisals. And then once we do that, we'll take a step back and we'll try to understand what the law, international humanitarian law, has to say, secular law, about the topic. And then once we have a basic understanding of the Torah perspective and the secular law perspective, then we're going to do a deep dive and see how Israeli rabbis and legal scholars have tried to approach it. I'm not at all an expert in this field. I do know international law quite well, but I'm not a Bible scholar, and I'm certainly not an ordained rabbi, not in Yeshiva Elimelech or in any other fine establishment. But what I can do is issue spot quite well. And when you look at the literature on the topic, you'll see that there are certain texts or model texts that everyone refers to in their conversations. And my goal for the yeshiva in this series of lectures is to provide you with those texts, those texts that everyone is talking about in the conversation about what the Torah has to say about reprisals in the Bible, and what the Torah has to say about it in our world today. My world is to introduce you to those texts and for you to make up your own decision. So the reason I feel comfortable doing this is because I'm not creating any expectations of what the halacha is. I'm just giving you an overview of the critical texts. And so, as any good lawyer will begin with, is a disclaimer that I have to continue with. And this disclaimer is extremely important because I'm only talking about reprisals in the Bible. I'm only talking about what the Torah has to say about reprisals. And before even defining what reprisals are, I just want to tell you what I'm not talking about, and to have an intelligent opinion about the topic, we have to also understand all of these and other issues. So whether or not an Israeli soldier has the right to respond with force and potentially kill innocent bystanders assumes that Israel or Jews have the authority to even enter into any warfare at all. So before we talk about how much force can be used, we have to talk about whether any force at all can be used. As we will see, there are those like the Satmar Rebbe who believe that since the Churban of the Beit Sheni, since the destruction of the Second Temple, there is no authority for Jews to enter into war, period. And any innocent bystander that is killed was murdered. So it's not obvious that we even have any authority at all from a halachic standpoint to make recourse to force. Second of all, there's an issue of nekama, or revenge. There's a clear prohibition of revenge, and it seems that revenge is something that is in God's hands. But then, as we'll see later in Numbers 31, there are also wars of revenge that we were commanded to fight. So the whole issue of the lawfulness and prohibition of revenge not being discussed today. Hora'at sha'ah, emergency law. Let's say you're driving in the rain and your car loses control, and you can either collide with oncoming traffic, or you can drive onto a third party's property and destroy his property. The law of necessity excuses you to take certain measures because your life is in danger. So there are all sorts of halachic legal issues having to do with how the law changes in the status of necessity. Famously, for example, in Nazi Germany, 80 years ago, they said, Notrecht weist kein Gesetz. No, emergency knows no law. So the idea is you can justify almost anything if your life is on the line. Again, extremely complex topic, not being discussed today. Pikuach nefesh. There's a whole concept of when your life is in danger, your right of self-defense, your individual right of self-defense, not being discussed today. Rodef. If a assailant is coming to kill you, you are obligated to stand and repel his threat of force, and you have the authority to kill him. Now, if he comes and he's next to other people, you do not have the authority to kill innocent bystanders in the context of the Rodef, not being discussed today, because we're discussing today the context where we have authority to enter into war, and the question is not can we use force, but how much force we can use in the context of a war. So we're not going to be talking about the din of Rodef. What about ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, lex talionis? So when somebody gouges out your eye, how can you respond? Not discussing the rabbinic interpretation of you have to pay him back in compensation. Not going into how to measure the response using ayin tachat ayin. Dina de malchuta dina is another critical topic, which is the law of the government, or the law of the land is binding. So what about international law? We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Goel hadam, the law does allow you, when you are a family member of a killed victim, in certain circumstances, the Bible does permit revenge killings, blood killings. Not talking about that today. Egla arufa, that's the idea that if a dead body is found between two cities, that both are to some degree collectively responsible. How to use the model of collective responsibility from Egla arufa, not talking about that. The laws of siege we're not talking about. We're not talking about the laws of wicked cities, ir nidachat. We're not talking about pidyon shvuim, which is the law of freeing hostages. There's a very, very large literature about how much is too much to give in order to redeem hostages. And finally, we're not talking about the 7 Noachite laws, the Sheven Bnei Noach, for the most part, although in one Rambam we'll talk about it. So these are all major, major topics that I just have to introduce that we're not talking about. We're only schmoozing about reprisals. Okay. I have a hypothesis that I want to share with you, and that hypothesis is based on your understanding of my underlying research question. So what's my research question? Does halacha permit the killing of innocents when there's no immediate threat of life? So we are sitting in Tel Aviv, and we have a command and control center, military command and control center, and Hezbollah attacks from the north in Lebanon, and it doesn't destroy anything. It doesn't hurt or kill anyone. And the question is, can we respond? And in response to a non-immediate life-threatening attack, can we kill innocent bystanders? Obviously, we can't target them, but are we allowed to respond in a reprisal, in a belligerent reprisal, in a way that maybe even likely will kill an innocent bystander, even though that's not a desired outcome? So I'm starting from a place of empathy, which is to say that obviously the Torah values life, and obviously we all believe that no matter how racist we are, right? In the Simon Wiesenthal Center, it asks you to go through 2 doors, the door for racists and the door for non-racists. And if you try to go through the door of non-racist, you'll find that it's locked. We're all biased and have our own predispositions, but we'd like to think that the Torah is not that way. The Torah loves everyone, even criminals, the Torah and Hashem loves. So I'm coming from a premise of empathy in trying to understand, what the Torah, who loves everyone, has to say about this situation. And my hypothesis is that halacha provides what I call a background argument that supports a narrative of international law that is supportive of both Israel and its enemies at the same time. I say both, a narrative that supports Israel and its enemies, but not all of its enemies, because we'll see that if you're dealing with an enemy that does not acknowledge and does not reciprocate basic humanitarian rights, the Torah offers more authority than it would otherwise provide. So let's start at the beginning. Basically, the Torah prohibits murder, right? In several places. This is a sprinkled sampling of those prohibitions, but it talks about in Genesis 9, shofech dam adam v'adam damoy shofech, that if you spill someone's blood, your own blood will be spilled. And the idea is that everyone is born in the image of God. And Genesis 4, in the fight between Cain and Abel, how the blood of his brother is screaming to Cain from the ground. So clearly, from the very beginning, the idea that murder is criminal and gravely prohibited. And then, of course, in both versions of the 10 Commandments, it says in Commandment number 6, Lo tirtzach, thou shalt not murder. And then it says later, V'lo tachnifu ha'aretz asher atem ba, don't contaminate the grounds that you're going to live in Israel, ki adam hu yachnif ha'aretz, because blood will contaminate the land. And basically will be ousted from the land if we spill blood on there. So let's talk briefly about the prohibition of murder in the Gemara. And there's a clear prohibition that very, very famous, the classic locus classicus of the prohibition of murder in the Gemara and the Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin, which with God's help, Rabbi Herzfeld will bring us to soon in the Daf Yom Yishir. It says, and I'll read from the English to save time, the Gemara asks, from where do we derive the halacha with regard to murder himself, that one must allow himself to be killed rather than to commit murder? So someone approaches you and says, I will kill you unless you kill an innocent person. You have to be killed rather than kill an innocent person. How do we know this? Because, and I'm skipping now to the bottom, it is preferable that he should be killed, that he should kill you and you should not kill, because who is to say that your blood is redder than his, right? Mi yemar de dama didach sumak tvei. Dilma dama dahu gavra sumak tvei. Maybe his blood is redder than yours. Who says you deserve that, right? So when we're talking about the ability to suspend the prohibition of murder in order to kill innocent people, it's not a simple thing. Not a simple thing at all. And we shouldn't take it for granted. Now, the state of Israel has been around for 76 years, but before the state of Israel, or in the infancy of state of Israel, there was a whole group of rabbinic scholars, most famously represented by the Satmar Rebbe, who said that, and I'll quote, when it comes to the killing of innocents in Israel, that it was the founding of the state of Israel and the bloodshed and the homicide, says the Satmar Rebbe, that resulted from it, that caused the Holocaust. Their hands are stained with bloodshed, and they are the reason, the Zionists are the reason for the great tragedy in which 6 million Jews were killed. From then until now, tens of thousands of Jews have been killed because of the impure idea of establishing a state by means of the sword and strength. Also, the occupation of Sinai in 1956, that was extolled as a miracle, only resulted in the deaths of many Jews who went against the Torah opinion. Anyone who brings about a war that endangers life against the opinion of the Torah is a murderer. According to the Satmar Rebbe, we are diaspora Jews, and we don't have the authority to enter into warfare. Yes, Rabbi Herzl.
Okay, so my question for you is, that was the rhetoric that they put out, maybe like at the founding of the state of Israel, but now everybody sees how Israel is a success. Are they still speaking like that? Are the Rebbe's still speaking like that?
So I haven't read, that's a great question. I haven't read any updated rhetoric, but my guess, since I haven't heard the reverse true, is that this is presumed to continue to be the opinion of both children who are, as you know, in a machloket about for the true heir of the Satmar Rebbeiship, of the dynasty, and I think they both still hold by this value. The more typical answer is the one by Rabbi Dr. Bleich of Yeshiva University, were war to be sanctioned solely on the basis of the law of pursuit, the din rodef. If somebody's coming to attack you, that you can rise and fight him off. Military action would perforce be restricted to situations in which loss of life is inflicted only upon armed aggressors or upon active participants in the war effort. Military action, in contrast, resulting in casualties among civilian populace would constitute homicide, pure and simple. In other words, Rabbi Bleich says that we need the laws of war, and we need Israel and the Jewish people to be able to categorize their efforts as a milchemet chova, or a milchemet mitzvah, as an obligatory war, which we'll get to in a minute. And the main body of rabbis, like Rabbi Kamenetsky, Rabbi Schachter, Rav Ovadia Yosef, Rav Elyashiv, and Rav Kanievsky, all the main poskei ador, all the main halachic arbiters have agreed with Rabbi Bleich and disagreed with the Satmar Rebbe. Another exception I will add is the Panovich Rav. The Rosh Yeshiva of Panovich agreed with the Satmar Rebbe that what Israel is doing is homicide, pure and simple homicide, because Jews do not have the right to enter into war until the Messiah comes. I like the quote from, or the word that Rav Kanievsky uses, which is, he says like this: does the Torah permit the killing of innocents in times of war? Histapaknu. It's unclear. That's what Rav Kanievsky says. But he then goes on to paskin, to rule that Israel has to do everything that it can to ward off threats. So he says intellectually, theoretically, histapaknu, we're not sure, but practically, halacha lemaaseh, we have to do everything we can to ward off threats. And this is the quote from the Talmud. Rabbi Herzfeld, how much time do we have?
We definitely, yeah, 5 minutes. No, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. So this is the quote from the Talmud that talks about how in the event of an obligatory war, everyone has to go and fight, but in the event of a non-obligatory war, not everyone has to. And so the question is, what is a preventative war? A war that isn't directly a result of an attack, but you know something bad is going to happen. Is that an obligatory war, or is that an optional war? And it says here, and this is brilliant, and it takes you into the mindset of Surah and Pupadita and the Babylonian scholars of 1500 years ago. It says, with respect to the wars that Joshua waged to conquer Israel, everyone agrees they were obligatory, the wars of conquest. And with respect to the wars waged by King David, everyone agrees they were elective or optional wars. Where they disagree is with regard to preventative wars that are waged to reduce the Gentiles, so that they will not come and wage war against them. And he continues to say, the nafka mina, last line, what is the halachic difference? La'osek b'mitzvah shepatar min ha-mitzvah. That's how they viewed the difference of a preventative war. Today, preventative war, should Israel go into Lebanon? It is a huge, huge issue that everyone is called about to think about. In the time of the Gemara, for them, this was just, the only difference would be, if it's an obligatory war, the question is it better if I learn in Bnei Brak, or can I get up? Am I allowed to get up from Bnei Brak to serve in the army? Can you imagine a Rosh Yeshiva of any Hezer Yeshiva saying that you are not allowed to get up from a yeshiva in order to fight in a war? But at that time, that was considered a reasonable nafka mina. So let's go to this week's parsha and a few, so we can cover a little bit of the ground, so we'll be ready for next class. But in last week's parsha, in Dvarim Kaf, it talks about when you are sieging, you're besieging an enemy town in order to conquer it, that you are prohibited from destroying fruit trees, from destroying fruit-bearing trees. So some people say, just to give you a flavor, if we're prohibited from destroying fruit-bearing trees, of course we're prohibited from killing innocent lives, because we value innocent lives much more than we value trees. But let's look at the Sefer Chinuch. The Sefer Chinuch writes, typically for his time, V'shorshei mitzvah yadua shehu b'dei lelamed nafshenu lehov hatov v'hatov. It's trying to teach us how to live. We should be very careful of the trees. The trees, we're fighting a war, people are dying. And this is very representative of the chinuch, who cares about every little detail. Because if you care about the details, if you're careful about the details, then you'll be careful about everything. And if your heart and if your actions will always go in the good way, then your heart will follow. The Sefer Chinuch and the Baal Chinuch always said, that after your actions follow your heart. So he was always very careful about that sort of thing. And then we get to Devarim Zayin, where we're talking about the 7 + 1, the 7 nations plus Amalek. And it's clear here that God is telling the Jews, total annihilation, total war, men, women, children. So there's clearly a basis in the Torah for this. And even in this week's parsha, it says, "Ki tetzeh lemilchama al oivecha natata Hashem b'yedecha v'shavita shivyo." When you go out in the field against your enemies, and Hashem delivers them into your power, and you take some of them captives, and it tells you the laws of captivity and what to do. And then in pasuk Zayin of Per Kaf Gimel says, "Lo tidrosh shlomam v'toratam kol yimei chayecha." do not even offer them peace prior to killing them. So that's where we are right now. And to conclude with the Sefer Chinuch, that we don't see any clear prohibition of reprisals in the Torah. And in fact, if you look at the Sefer Chinuch, it makes it very clear that these people that we have to go out in total war from, they will contaminate us, and we have to annihilate them in order to prevent anything from happening. But, last line, in these days, since we don't fight against the 8 nations, it doesn't apply. So to better understand the problem by way of transition, we've exhausted some basic rules in the Torah, but now to really understand the nuance of the problem, in the next year, we'll start with a secular legal understanding of what reprisals are and how they are regulated, and then we'll go back to what it says in the Torah through the eyes of the most recent and most important Israeli poskim.